They are on the heavy side, but that's what happens when you move from a less durable plastic to a more durable metal construction. They aren't anvils or impossible to pick up and move around, but you definitely notice a weight difference between, say, the Saytech rudder pedals, which is what I used prior to these Ruddo Plus pedals. I also haven't been able to brake this smooth or this evenly on any other rudder pedal setup. The load cell toe brakes were a feature to almost die for in these Ruddo Plus pedals. It felt like I could finally control the simulator aircraft like you do a real one, using pressures rather than an unrealistic, raw feeling input. Aside from major changes in direction, which require more than a pressure input in the real world anyway, maintaining centerline, for example, was done just by easing physical pressure or adding physical pressure to one pedal or another. You'll see on this first takeoff that as the aircraft gains speed, my inputs and pressures become much less noticeable. I promise I am giving an input, but it's nothing more than a bit of pressure, which, in my experience, is also true inside of a real aircraft. On camera, it'll probably seem like I'm not using the Ruddo Plus pedals a whole lot, but the reality is I'm using them just as much as the yoke and throttle actually. It's just that they are so precise with the Hall sensors and operate so smoothly that using a true pressure input is possible, and this precision and ability to mimic real-world pilots and the rudder inputs carry over to the Yoko Plus and TQ6 Plus products as well. I have a feeling I'm going to say pressure or some form of it about 100 more times before the end of this video, but that's really the type of input I'm using to use these controls. We can see on this takeoff, shortly after I pull back with both hands to take off, I'm able to trim and relax a bit, enjoy some sights while I'm climbing out, while maintaining a physically felt pressure on the Yoko Plus, something I wouldn't have been so keen to do using my last setup. The smoothness in the controls as you move them is a real treat in the hand or under the feet. Pulling back on this Yoko Plus, advancing these TQ6 Plus throttles, or kicking the Ruddo Plus rudder pedals at a crosswind landing was always satisfying. These controls do a good job at providing the user physical feedback. As you approach the end of travel in the Yoko Plus and Ruddo Plus, things get stiffer. It starts to require more and more force the further from center you get. For example, using full left or right aileron almost requires two hands due to the physical forces required. This holds true in real aircraft as well, because the further into the airstream you put a control surface, the more force required to hold it there. Flight simming has never felt closer to my real-world experiences before Virtual Fly sent me these to try out. With them, I'm now smoother and more precise in all my maneuvers, which told me I was being held back by my old controls at least up to my own personal abilities or technical abilities of the product. I've flown enough real-world aircraft to know it's not as hard as it seemed in a simulator with other control methods to maintain bank, altitude, and coordinated flight. Virtual Fly has made the most natural feeling hardware that I've had the liberty of using thus far in my over 10 years of flight simming, and I've used joysticks, yokes, and or rudder pedals either through friends or personal purchases of Saytech, Logitech, CH, Thrustmaster, and Honeycomb, with Virtual Fly now being added to this list. I've even used a Sidewinder force feedback joystick that Microsoft made, but this was when I first started simming a while ago. Now, none of that means all of those products I used prior were bad by any means. In fact, I got many hours of enjoyment out of some of them. Some maybe more hours of enjoyment than I'd care to admit, if I'm honest. The point is, These products from Virtual Fly also go in certified FAA full motion sims and are handmade and not necessarily mass produced. Because of this, things like this aren't really present on Virtual Fly's products here. As I was using these products, the precision the Hall sensors brought, as if being able to do coordinated turns while maintaining bank and altitude more precisely than ever before wasn't enough. These TQ6 Plus throttles allowed me to be accurate down to a single RPM. For example, I was able to cure my OCD by setting, say, 2200 RPMs exactly rather than having to live with something like 2208. You can also set your desired stiffness by using the little turn knobs on the left and right of the TQ6 Plus. On the right you have mixture and propeller friction, as it's also sometimes called, and on the left you have a knob for the throttles for even more control. When landing, the progressive stiffening of the controls that I mentioned before gave me the ability to better gauge what too much input was. I didn't find myself bobbing the nose as much because I had a full axis that felt the same from the beginning to the end of travel, and I also didn't find myself looking for that visual cue of too much input from the in-sim yoke that I normally did, because the Yoko Plus was giving it to me through touch and feel, and so I could focus more on the center line and flare. I just can't get over the fact that I can use a true pressure input when flying on my simulators now. The precision from the Hall sensors and physical feedback you get from all the controls getting stiffer with the input, the extremely high build quality using metal rather than plastics, and the fact these same controls go into certified simulators were only a few of my favorite aspects about these controls. I was so busy having fun with the load cells and the toe brakes on the Ruddo Plus Pedals, I almost didn't make this taxiway here actually.